decided to change my ways.
Welcome back to the Leaving Eden podcast. We are here. My name is Gavi, and as always, I'm here with cult expert, cult survivor Sadie Carpenter. How is life today?
So we are living in sede vacante. The seat is vacant. There is no pope. And I am so jazzed to talk about not just like the cool process of the conclave, but also some of the predictions on who might be elected the next pope.
I'm excited to hear because I haven't done hardly any research on who is actually a candidate for pope this time around. I've done a lot of research on how they choose the pope and sort of the history of how that decision making process changed to become what it is now.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to hear what you have to say. And I have some cool facts that I've learned about this that I can't wait to tell you because I think that you're going to be interested by them. In case you haven't realized it and you're listening to this episode, we're going to do this episode about how they pick the pope, who is potentially going to be pope, and the history of that and what's going on there in the Vatican right now and what that process looks like. I'm excited to get to talk about this because it's so interesting.
This is going to be a great one.
But before we get into that, the Leaving Eden podcast is the podcast about my BFF and co-host, cult expert, cult survivor, Sadie Carpenter, her life in and escape from the independent fundamental Baptist cult, the cult in which she was raised. We talk about this cult, we talk about other cults, we talk about religion, we talk about fundamentalism, we talk about the real and present threat that cults and cult ideologies pose to society as a whole. And it is our goal to promote freedom of mind, freedom of thought, and freedom of religion. So if you're a fan of this show and you like what we do, you can subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/Leaving Eden podcast. You go there, you get the content early, you get the content, it's extended. There's bonus stuff on there that not just anybody gets to see, but only our patrons get to see. So it's a little secret, it's a little fun. Also, it's ad-free. Also, it's
I'm sorry. You said secret Patreon stuff, and I was thinking about that one comment that I made about Michelle Duggar.
Oh God. I remember that one. That was a little
That might have been on I Gave It All Tier, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Possibly. We now are apparently operating YouTube videos now, operating a YouTube channel. You can go there and you can look at our first offering on the YouTube platform, the first like real video offering on the YouTube platform, which is me reviewing the Paul Olagus book, Pab's Legend of Bloodfang, which just came out like a week ago or a week and a half ago at the time of recording this. We're going to have an episode coming out next week where we discuss that maybe in greater detail than I go into on the video, but you can go to our YouTube channel and check out the YouTube video that I made kind of breaking down what's going on in this book and what my thoughts about it are. And that is youtube.com/ I don't know. So the Leaving Eden podcast YouTube channel, go there and find that. And as always, you can join our Facebook group and our subreddit and our Discord server. Links to those are both down below in the episode show notes, and you'll be able to find that there. Anything else before we thank the patrons?
I don't think so.
We would, of course, not be able to do this show without the help of our lovely and wonderful patrons. And we have 4 I Gave It All Tier patrons. Your names are Kathleen Moncrief, Melissa Manown, Melora King, and Todd Dale. On behalf of his wonderful deconstructing spouse, Madeline Antrim, thank you so much.
Yes, huge thank you to our I Gave It All Tier patrons.
Our Faith Promise Missions tier patrons, your names are Alex P., Allie Foley-Shank, Allie Allen, Chad Harris, Chris Walker, Dora J., Eleanor Donahue, Elizabeth Struther, Hannah Ross, Hope Norum, Janine Collin, Jana Connor, Jen Kaharski, Jessica Tambo, Jezebel Diablo, Jonna, Junie B. Jones, and the B stands for Back on My Bullshit, Kay Terwee, Kristen Marie, Linda Morgan, Madeline Antrim, Madeline Cusick, Marlene Stuve, Mary Martin, Rob the Methodist, Stephanie Johnson, Steve and Amy, Susie, Tara McNamara, 1010, Yafi Lavova, and Zoe, Shuck. Thank you guys for subscribing at the Faith Promise Missions tier of our Patreon.
Yeah, and a huge thanks and shout out not only to our I Gave It All tier and Faith Promise Missions tier patrons, but to everybody who supports us financially, no matter what amount, and to everybody who supports us in wonderful non-financial ways like sharing us with friends and family, leaving us a positive review on whatever podcast platform you listen to, talking about us on social media. All of that makes a very real difference, and we truly appreciate it.
In most episodes, we talk about potentially triggering topics, including but not limited to suicide and mental health, PTSD symptoms, and spiritual and mental abuse, including but not limited to guilt and shame and fear. In most episodes, we'll talk about these topics in general, but not into specifics. In today's episode, I don't think we're talking about any of this stuff in specifics.
Yeah, we'll very briefly mention child sexual abuse because we are talking about the Catholic Church, but with absolutely no details or any stories of the kind.
Excellent.
What are we talking about first?
We're talking about the Pope.
Did JD Vance kill the Pope?
That's the real question.
So I had a really unique experience with finding out that the Pope died because my kid needed me in the middle of the night at like 2 a.m, my time, Pacific time. So I got up, I took care of what she needed me to take care of. I put her back to bed. I got myself back to bed. And for some reason, I opened my email. Yes, I know it's a terrible habit. Don't come for me.
Do people really complain about it? Do people be like, you shouldn't be doing that?
You literally came on my other podcast and said not to do that.
I came on your other podcast and said what I was doing. I didn't come on your podcast to tell you what you should be doing.
Okay, fair.
And also, now that I'm editing video, I had to resaturate the colors on my computer, so I can't really talk about like keeping it's like, what are you gonna do? I was like trying to edit video and I'm like, why does this look all washed? Oh wait, it's because the colors on my screen are all
if you want to know what Gavi's talking about, go back a couple episodes on Good Girls Bad Days. We had a really good conversation. Anyway,
no, but do people really get mad at you for using your phone in bed? I feel like everyone does that.
I don't know if people actually get mad at me. I just feel an intense need to COA for everything.
Maybe that's to do with being raised fundy.
Yeah, or it could be the OCD. Who knows? Anyway, I opened my email in bed and saw Pope Francis died. And it was a neat experience because of the time that my kid woke me up in the middle of the night, PST, Pacific time. I need more coffee. I was up in the middle of the night and saw the news break that the Pope had died. And I knew that he had just met JD Vance like less than 24 hours before he died. And it's the middle of the night. I was just up with my kid. I'm tired. And I remember texting the group chat, Pope died, I blame Vance. And then turning my phone off and going back to sleep. It was like, that was the only thought that my half asleep brain could put together.
Well, you weren't the only one who made that connection.
Yeah, I just wish I had tweeted it because I feel like other people did and got a lot of action. Definitely think it's interesting that JD Vance converted to Catholicism, went to meet the Pope, and then first the Pope blew him off and sent some other guy to lecture him. And then the Pope finally met him, and then the Pope died the next day.
I think maybe meeting JD Vance is just so grating that Pope Francis said, I'm ready, my lord.
Yeah, you know what? I'm done. Beam me up, Scotty.
Pope Francis made history for the Catholic Church. He was the first pope that was from South America. He was the first pope who was also a Jesuit. He's also a pope who was known for focusing heavily on the poor and the needy. He was very much a reformer, and I think he oversaw probably the greatest progressive shift within the Catholic Church since Vatican II.
I would say that's accurate. So for people who might not know, Pope Francis was born in Argentina, and that's how he became the first pope from the Americas, which I think is pretty cool. As you mentioned, he was a Jesuit. We talked about the Jesuits quite a bit when we talked about fraudster and Jack Chick muse Alberto Rivera. who was not a real Jesuit or a real priest. The Jesuits are an order within the Catholic Church that are known for a more liberal or progressive viewpoint and a deep commitment to education. Especially among the kind of fundamentalists that take Jack Chick seriously, the Jesuits are looked on with a lot of suspicion. The head of the Jesuit order has sometimes been referred to as the Black Pope, as in the shadowy man in black who holds the real power behind the papacy. I think that term is a lot more useful to describe Eddie Lapina than it is to describe the head of the Jesuit order. Eddie Lapina is a long time assistant pastor at First Baptist Church of Hammond.
Oh, right. Who was the lawyer? David Gibbs was the lawyer.
David Gibbs is the lawyer. Oh, okay. Yeah, no, Lapina is a longtime assistant pastor, and so it's fun fact. Do you remember when we reviewed Dave Heil's book on how to be a youth pastor?
Yes. Do I?
That's Lapina on the cover. The young man like holding a basketball on the cover of that book is Eddie Lapina.
Interesting.
Yeah, get this. He was a teenage member of Dave Heil's youth group that ended up joining the staff at First Baptist Church of Hammond and has stayed there for his entire career. Don't tell me that man doesn't have dirt on absolutely everybody.
I mean, it's kind of being an artist who was discovered by Diddy. And now is like checking over their shoulder to see if the FBI is after them.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, that's the real Black Pope, not the leader of the Jesuits. Another historical thing about Francis's papacy is that he was the first pope in many centuries to be elected after the previous pope resigned rather than died. In 2013, Pope Benedict XVI announced that he would resign. He was the first pope to resign rather than dying in office since the 15th century. Benedict, who was technically Pope Benedict XVI, was pope from 2005 to 2013. He was a German who had once been a member of the Hitler Youth, although factually, what we know, it is definitely true that all young men in his region were required to join the Hitler Youth. So whether he wanted to or not, we know he didn't have a choice. And his brother claimed that his parents were strongly against Nazi ideology and that young Joseph Ratzinger, who would become Pope Benedict XVI, skipped Hitler Youth meetings and refused to participate. I think the evidence is pretty good that he was not about that life.
I don't think that the Catholic Church would have picked somebody who was very excited to be a Hitler Youth. Like, think what you will about the Catholic
Church.
No, I'm saying think what you will about the Catholic Church. There's levels to this.
I don't put it past the church to pick somebody who in his youth was excited about being a member of the Hitler Youth and then like half-heartedly said, yeah, I'm not into that anymore as an adult. And then the church low-key gaslights everybody into saying that, no, he was really never that excited about being a member of the Hitler Youth. I don't trust the church that much to not like rewrite his personal history. Anyway, Benedict was seen as a pope with a strong return to conservatism, aesthetics, and traditionalism. He restored a lot of the fancier looking vestments for the Pope, some of the more traditional and what I would say fancy elements of Mass. He drew controversy for what was seen as a weak response to sexual abuse scandals within the church. He also refused to approve of condoms for the purpose of reducing HIV transmission. Benedict was closely tied to or very liked by the kind of Catholics who are all about the return to the Latin Mass. Benedict was not one of those ultra-conservative Catholics or an ultra-conservative Catholic who wanted to move back to the Latin Mass. Benedict was conservative for being within the church, but he wasn't the Proud Boys version of Catholics. Is not what we're talking about here.
He wasn't the Italian cardinal from Conclave.
Right, no. He, although I do think that cardinal has some traits of his, he was not that guy. He was more of just a traditional conservative within the church guy. That means I would disagree with a lot of his views. I don't think he was an extreme traditionalist to the point of being harmful on purpose. So it was a surprise to some people after Pope Benedict, who was very conservative, that Pope Francis was elected in 2013. Benedict was a pope who had a lot to say about anti-consumerism, but he also leaned in really hard to the pageantry and the symbolism of the church. Francis, on the other hand, was a cardinal who described himself as a simple pastor. One thing that was really emblematic of this is the papal red shoes. So every piece of the Pope's clothing and cardinal's clothing is prescribed by church tradition, especially when you see the Pope like in the classic big white cape, big white and gold pointy hat, or the cardinals in the red robes with the little cape, the shorter cape, and the red kind of beret looking hat. It's called a zacchetto, I think. Traditionally, in that full regalia, the Pope wears bright red leather shoes, and Benedict was the first Pope in a while to choose to wear the bright red leather shoes, because he was about like the aesthetics of things and the awe and majesty, I think, of what the church represents. Francis immediately went straight back to not wearing the fancy red leather shoes. On the day that he was elected Pope, Francis appeared wearing his iron cross necklace, it's a pectoral cross, that he had worn 4 years while pastoring, rather than a papal gold cross, which he was offered. By the way, if you're a little bit of a Francis fan, there's a really sweet photo of his feet in his coffin, and you can see that he's wearing scuffed, clearly worn, plain black shoes, exactly like he wore in life. I thought that was a really sweet photo.
Although you might want to, look over your shoulder before Googling Pope feet pics.
Yeah. Also, depending on how squeamish you are about death, you may not want to closely examine other views of Francis after death.
Yeah.
The contrary to popular belief, as best as I can tell, popes are embalmed. There's a lot of rumor that they are not, and I don't think that's accurate, but they are generally embalmed as little as possible, and there's not a lot of cosmetic work like you would see in the United States. They definitely look more dead. Pope Francis. Another thing about his simplicity is he chose the name Francis in honor of St. Francis Assisi, who was a saint known for his devotion and commitment to children and to the poor, and also for his love of animals. If you see a statue of a Catholic monk, like in the brown robe with the rope belt and the monk haircut, and he's got a little bird sitting on his shoulder, that's a statue of St. Francis. So all that to say, Pope Francis was not a perfect guy by any means. He wasn't some kind of progressive, wonderful, gonna lead the church all the way into the 21st century. But there was a lot of good to say about him, especially from the perspective of progressive Christians who are into science and being nice to everybody, like actually everybody. One of the biggest news stories that Francis made was when he allowed blessings to be said over same-gender marriages. And I think that's actually a really good way to look at him in perspective. He didn't make strides to have same-gender or same-sex marriages actually recognized by the church or performed in the church. He didn't get women in the pulpit as priests. He didn't declare that LGBTQ people are not sinning by being who they are. But he did open the door to that far wider than any pope ever has. And he put his reputation on the line for that. He was asked directly if LGBTQ people were sinning simply by being themselves, and his response was something like, "Who am I to judge? I'm not God. How would I know?" I would love to see the largest Christian institution in the world value, welcome, and fully affirm LGBTQ people. I would love that. We're a long way from that. And I think we can balance that Francis did not get us all the way to that affirmation and acceptance, but that he also did put his own reputation very much on the line to get closer. Other causes that he was very connected to included climate change and climate reform and progress within the church. He did not support women becoming priests, but he did allow women to participate in some areas of church life that had never been allowed before. He also led the Catholic Church in verbally apologizing to Native communities in areas where residential schools were a thing. So overall, I'm not saying that he was perfect or he didn't completely change the Catholic Church to be a wholly unproblematic and entirely progressive institution, but I believe that he made major and truly brave changes for good, and that he rocked the boat in some very positive ways.
Do you want to go take up the offering now, and then we could talk about the history of the decision-making process behind picking a new pope and how that's going to go in a couple weeks when that happens?
Absolutely.
Hey, Sadie here. If this is your first time listening to the Leaving Eden podcast, make sure you go back and check out episode 57. It's a primer episode for new listeners. That episode tells my personal story and gives you all the terms and information that you'll need to know going forward. Also, check out our cult true crime series, The First Family of Fundamentalism, so that you can get the whole cult story. If you like our show, you can support us by joining our Patreon, where we have extended and uncensored episodes as well as other bonus content available. You can also join in the discussion in our Facebook group. That group is called Eden Exodus. Tell a friend, tell a family member, tell your worst enemy. The Leaving Eden podcast is a fully independent podcast, and we really appreciate your support. Now, back to the show.
We are back from our break. We're talking about how they pick the Pope. So now that Pope Francis has died, it is time for the Catholic Church to choose a new Pope. This is obviously very important. The Pope is an extremely influential person. The Pope serves as the leader of the Catholic Church and has a lot of power in setting or changing church policy. Now, since the church is about 2,000 years old, church doctrine is pretty set in stone. So the Pope can't go out and say, actually, we've decided to do Mass on Tuesday because Sunday conflicts with the NFL. But, you know, like the Pope has a lot of leeway in setting what is church policy. Also, as the head of the Holy See, which is the Catholic Church's central government, it's the job of the Pope to set policy about faith and morality within the church. So then the diocese parishes, whatever, have to follow that. For example, Pope Francis changed a church policy regarding divorce, allowing divorced people to receive communion, and he also made it easier for people to receive annulments within the church. So that's something that isn't like, it's not like he's changing what they think Jesus is or what the Eucharist is or something like that. But he can say, this is how we behave towards this kind of person now, and this changing a church policy.
Yeah, it's quote unquote Catholic issues, things that Catholics are known for arguing about a lot, such as abortion, birth control, marriage, divorce, LGBTQ issues, women in the church. Those are the things the Pope has a lot more leadership on.
Yeah. So, for example, he said publicly that the church could potentially change the rules around celibacy of priests, since that is a church issue and not a religious doctrine. Theologically speaking, the Catholic Church considers the Pope to be the apostolic successor to St. Peter, who was put in charge of the church by Jesus. So it's the job of the Pope to instruct Catholics on how to act with regards to issues that are facing the world. And Pope Francis did this quite often. He is best known, as Sadie put it, Sadie said earlier, he advocated quite often on behalf of migrants and refugees, including refugees from the civil war in Syria, migrants traveling by sea from North Africa to Europe, and migrants traveling from Latin America to the United States. In fact, Pope Francis visited the U.S.-Mexico border in order to advocate for migrants, and this is kind of a big deal, because when the Pope goes anywhere, it's a big deal. So the fact that he decided to go to the border means that he thought that it was an issue important enough to warrant his voice and attention. He also spoke out publicly against attempts by the Trump administration to do mass deportation. So it isn't particularly uncommon for popes to speak about the specific details about what policies and governments are doing. For instance, Saint John Paul II, who was pope from 1978 until 2005, is believed to be the man who was seen in person by the most people in human history. And his that stands to reason.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
He was Pope for 25, 26 years, and he was quite a popular Pope.
Yeah, and he traveled a ton.
He was really well known for his outreach. And whenever he went anywhere, at least 100,000 people would show up. JP2, his signature issue was freedom from political repression. His visit to Poland in 1979 is seen as a pivotal moment in the history of Eastern Europe, and many, including former Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev, believed that the Iron Curtain would not have fallen if it had not been for the actions of Pope John Paul II. John Paul II also visited Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet in 1987 and asked him to restore democracy to Chile, and then he did. He actually he did soon after. Yeah, it's crazy. So the Pope has a lot of power. There's approximately 1.4 billion Catholics in the world, billion with a B. And if the Catholic Church were its own country, then it would be the second most populous country in the world, behind India and ahead of China. So the Pope is kind of the big influencer for all of these people. So it's a big deal about who's going to be the next Pope. They're going to have to pick, are they going to pick someone who's a reformer like Pope Francis, or they're going to pick somebody who's very conservative and is going to put the brakes on or roll back some of the changes that Pope Francis made? We don't know. Towards the end of the episode, Sadie's going to take us through some of the potential pontiffs, because there's potential that we could have another first ever, just like Pope Francis was the first ever from South America.
Yeah, there's a really decent shot that we're going to get a first ever. And I do want to let you know that the candidates, the people who are likely to be voted in to be the next pope, are called papabile. Popeable. Which I just think that's a really cute thing to say about somebody.
So they're palpable popes.
It's like saying boyfriend material. They're popeable.
Starting out, like everybody else, I rented the movie Conclave this past week.
Did you like it?
I loved it.
Do you know how it's really hard to get me to watch all the way through a movie one time? Yes. Even if you're like, hey, Sadie, you should watch this movie 100 times.
Yeah, it's got a lot of your pet issues in it, though. I don't want to say pet issues, but things you're passionate about.
Yeah. Also, though, I watched this movie twice.
Wow.
Yeah, which is a very high compliment coming from a person who almost never sits through a whole movie.
It was a great movie. I'm wondering how accurate I know that the process that they portrayed in the movie is the process that they go through to choose the Pope. But I'm wondering how, exactly how accurate it is to what actually goes on behind closed doors, because I looked up information about that and I couldn't really find a lot of it. And there, a lot of it is kind of well, there's leaks and rumors and there's, this and that, but people won't really go on the record and say, yeah, so this guy talked to this guy and said this thing, and was part of the decision. And this person got this many votes in the first round of balloting. And then, there's not a lot of transparency there.
Yeah, no one else was in the room where it happened.
No.
The room where it happened.
So starting out, who's qualified to be Pope? Conventional wisdom would say that it should be somebody who is a priest, who has been a priest for a certain number of years, maybe a cardinal, maybe a bishop. But I was surprised to learn that any male person who has been baptized into the Roman Catholic Church is qualified to be Pope. That's it. That's all you need. That means that there are almost 700 million people who could potentially be chosen as Pope. 700 million. However, for the past 750 years or so, the Pope has been selected from the College of Cardinals, who is also the group of people who get to vote on who gets to be Pope. So the Pope doesn't have to be from the College of Cardinals, but it would be a huge shock if they picked somebody who wasn't from the College of Cardinals. And if you watch Conclave,
they could pick Biden.
They could pick Joe Biden to be Pope. They could, if they really wanted to. They could pick...
Yes, they actually could.
They could pick J.D. Vance to be Pope if they really wanted to.
Oh, no.
No, thank you.
I'm gonna find out that his baptism was invalid real quick.
I did see a video where somebody suggested that they could get Luigi Mangione to be Pope.
I'm sure. With a name like that, surely he was baptized Catholic, right?
I assume so. I think his Reddit history, people found out that he was a Catholic from his Reddit history. Who else could be baptized Pope? You know who they could baptize as Pope? Master P. Did you know Master P is Catholic?
No, I did not. I don't know who that is.
He's a rapper. He founded No Limit Records. If they got Master P to be Pope, then they could have the solid gold No Limit tank as the new Pope Mobile.
I don't know what that is, but it sounds like an awesome Pope Mobile.
You haven't seen the music video to Make Him Say by Master P. So you don't know what I'm talking about. Like 4 people that are listening to this that listen to hip hop music in like the late 90s, early 2000s are just like, oh my God, I remember that.
You just made those 4 people very happy, and that's worth it. Now I'm trying to think who else is baptized Catholic, because if it counts, even if you were baptized as a baby, you know who looks like they would have been baptized Catholic as a baby?
Who?
Vin Diesel.
Pope Vin Diesel. Okay, so there's going to be another
wasn't, hold on, wasn't Jen Shaw baptized Catholic?
No, she was Mormon. No, she was she was Mormon, and then she
converted to Islam.
They could pick Dewey, Jenny's terrible husband from Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, who wanted a sister wife.
Yes, because he was baptized Catholic. They absolutely could, because they converted.
I mean, there is potential that we could have a first Asian pope this time around. So why not it be Dewey from Real Housewives of Salt Lake City? Any male person who is baptized Catholic can be pope. And that was also like one of the issues in the movie Conclave, because the person who they ultimately chose to be pope turned out to be intersex. Very interesting.
Spoiler alert that.
Yeah. I mean,
so it kind of is the whole twist of the movie.
Well, it's a movie about who's worthy to be pope. And the whole idea of who is worthy is that if you really want to be pope, then you're not worthy to be pope. If you're like out here trying to angle for yourself, then you don't really want to be pope. And at the end, Ralph Fiennes, the cardinal that he played, the whole time he was like, I don't want it, I don't want it, I don't want it. And when they were asking him, Stan Tucci's character was saying, everybody has, since they became a cardinal, picked the name that they would go by when they got elected pope, if they ever got the honor. And they've been thinking about that beforehand. And if you're denying that, then you're a liar. And Ralph Fiennes was like, no, I didn't, because I never wanted to be pope. But then they asked him, and they finally got him to admit that he would be Pope John. Yeah.
He finally broke and said that he did have a name picked. To me, that was like a cute part of the movie, because that made me think of high school. And hopefully this is something that is very much a practice of the past and becomes more and more a practice of the past. But high school girls writing their first name with the last name of the boy they have a crush on in their notebook. Like, I don't want that to be compulsory any longer. I want that tradition to be only limited people who really want to do it. But it did make me think of that when all these guys are talking about like what their pope name would be.
That's kind of funny. That is kind of a fundy thing, though. I bet girls were doing that all the time when you were at Hyles Anderson.
Oh, yeah. I heard somebody refer to Conclave as the Mean Girls, but make it Catholic.
Yeah.
And because they have like the burn book, they have, and if Conclave is Mean Girls but make it Catholic, picking your pope name is trying to figure out what your last name will be when you get married.
The payoff at the end of the movie was really good. And I guess I'm spoiling the movie right here, but there's a terrorist attack in Rome around the time of the Conclave. There's a suicide bombing, and the cardinal who's like the trad cath who wants to bring back Latin Mass and who says we need to have an Italian pope because the church has gone off the rails. We need an Italian trad cath to be pope. And he is basically the trad caths, their candidate. There's a terrorist attack in Rome, and he gets up there and talks about how the Catholic Church is in a holy war against the Muslims, and the church needs to accept that this is what's really going on. They need to start calling a spade, stuff like that. The cardinal who ends up getting elected pope, who had been in Congo and Baghdad and was recently made the Archbishop of Kabul, Afghanistan, is like, you don't know what war is. And he gives this whole speech, and then this makes everyone want to vote for him for pope. Anyway, in the early days of the church, there was a lot of inconsistency in how the pope was chosen and who would get a say. So during this period, the church was kind of under control of the Roman aristocracy. And popes would, you could be deposed and replaced if you were pope, if the Roman aristocracy didn't like you. And there was a lot of politicking, and, there's still politicking, but now there's more of a kind of legitimate system for it, but there was different competing interests. There was, the power of the church, the power that the church had over life and society during this period was pretty strong. So it makes sense that they wouldn't want some austere group of church officials just deciding things without their input, especially if you were like Roman nobility. However, you can see how noblemen having an outsized say in who was in charge of the church could be a corrupting influence.
Yeah, also the Pope still has tons and tons and tons of major influence, but the Pope has very little formal political power now. And that was not the case in the time period that you're talking about.
And up to basically the mid 1800s, there was actual land that was ruled by the church. Like the papal states were legitimately like a country.
Right. And the Pope had a lot of, I don't know if I would say geopolitical, but international political power.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm getting into your special interest area because I know you're a history buff.
No worries. In 1058, Nicholas II was elected Pope under highly suspect circumstances. And there were allegations of vote buying. People were suspicious. People didn't think it was on the up and up. The following year, he instituted a change that from now on, the Pope would only be chosen by the College of Cardinals. Nicholas II died in 1061, so he was only Pope for 3 years. And he was replaced by Alexander II in a vote where the church, for the first time, did not seek approval from the imperial court, but just picked the Pope on their own. So following Alexander II's death in 1073, Gregory VII was elected Pope by acclamation, which is a rare process in which, rather than voting by secret ballot, the College of Cardinals just unanimously proclaims that they think this guy should be Pope. So Gregory VII, it was just we all get up and say, we want Gregory VII to be Pope. Huzzah! And Gregory VII is Pope. Gregory VII and Henry IV, Henry IV was the Holy Roman Emperor at the time. They were massively in conflict with one another. They kept declaring each other to be invalid. The Pope excommunicated the Emperor. It was a whole mess. Yeah, it got real messy.
Sorry, I remember this era of history. There was at one point 2 popes and they excommunicated each other.
Yes.
It's a whole deal.
It's crazy. You read it and you're like,
excommunicated is following the Mean Girls theme. Getting excommunicated is removing somebody from the group chat. I'm not your friend anymore. I know it's very serious and was very serious to these people, but also it seems a little over dramatic at times, and it can be funny.
So this power struggle between the church and the Holy Roman Empire went on for about 50 years. Until 1122, when Pope Calixtus II, that's a cool name, Pope Calixtus II and Henry V agreed that the Pope and the Cardinals would swear fealty to the Emperor in what is known as the Concordat of Worms. So they get to pick the Pope, but the Pope and the Cardinals have to swear fealty to the Emperor, which seems like that's theologically dubious to me. I don't know.
Yeah.
If I were a Catholic, I wouldn't be a fan of that. From 1268 to 1271, there was also no Pope because the Cardinals could not decide on who to pick. And eventually they chose Gregory X, and he introduced the Conclave system, by which the College of Cardinals would be sequestered, kind of like they do on jury duty if it's a murder trial. And they would only be given limited food until they came to a decision, because he's basically like, you guys are taking too long. This is ridiculous.
We're never doing that again.
Slice of bread a day. And then you don't come out until you have a new pope.
So the mom put all the cardinals in the get along shirt.
Yeah. It's a very don't make me come back there thing to do.
That's it. Back to Winnipeg.
The Conclave system, if you watch the movie Conclave, they made a big deal about how they weren't even allowed to get news from the outside. And the only way that they got news in from the outside was when there was legitimately like a terrorist attack and there was a bombing that blew out one of the windows, because they just don't want to let anybody in or out, because that might have some effect on the decision-making process.
Yeah, the idea is, at least in more modern times, the idea is that the Holy Spirit is going to impress one single person on the hearts of all of the cardinals that they can all agree on, and that person will become Pope.
Well, if your food and comfort is limited, then you're going to be more in tune with what the Holy Spirit is telling you.
Right, and if you lock out the guy who's a little bit of a drunk but has serious dirt on one of the major papal candidates, then he can't interfere with the Holy Spirit either.
During this period, there was also significant national influence on the selection of Pope, because at the time, the Pope, as we said, the Pope didn't just run the church. The Pope was also in charge of the government of the Papal States, which was actual territory ruled by the church. Which was in the middle of Italy. Like, if you think of like the south half of the boot and the north half of the boot, you have Sicily in the south and you have Tuscany in the north. And the Papal States were like a sort of like a section in the middle, which is sort of like near where Rome is. And it went from all the way from one coast to the other. There was actual territory, and the Papal States had military. They had, it was an actual, like, a legitimate country up until like the mid 1800s, basically. So if you were Spanish or a French monarch, or you were, the Holy Roman Emperor, you wanted a Pope that would back your interests and be your ally. So these countries, because, they were always fighting with each other and warring with each other. So these countries would actually nominate their own candidates for Pope. It's kind of crazy, right?
That is a little bit funny, yeah.
Yeah, like the French want this guy as Pope, the Spanish want this guy as, but this continued basically until the mid 19th century, at which point the Papal States got annexed by the Kingdom of Italy, and the last remnant of the Papal States that's left today is Vatican City.
The smallest country in the world.
But one of the most consequential. It's just like the movie Ratatouille, where a great chef can come from anywhere. I don't know what I'm doing here. But yeah, by the end of the 19th century, the church and the state were kind of sick of each other getting in each other's business and interfering. There was at the time, the governments of countries had an actual veto over who could be selected as Pope. So in 1903, Emperor Franz Joseph I of Austria vetoed the appointment of Cardinal Mariano Rampolla. This was kind of enough for the church. They just decided, okay, we're done. And when Pope Pius X was elected Pope, he officially ended vetoes on the Pope's election by states and sort of streamlined the whole process of selecting a Pope. And these processes, they've been updated and streamlined over the course of the 20th and 21st century, but it's pretty much stayed the same.
Can you imagine being Cardinal Mariano Rampolla? Like, you got elected Pope, and then and then this other guy was like, yeah, no.
Franz Joseph I of Austria, who's not even a cardinal, just says, sorry, I don't agree. It's kind of like the meme where it's the I consent, I don't.
Oh, no.
Isn't there someone you forgot to ask?
No. Franz Joseph of Austria.
Yeah. I'm going to make that meme, and I'm going to put that on our Instagram.
Yeah, that's the meme for this episode for sure.
So these are the rules today. Let me tell you the rules today.
Okay, let's do it.
Within a few weeks of the death or abdication of the Pope, the College of Cardinals assembles in the Sistine Chapel for what is known as the Papal Conclave. Extreme security measures are taken to ensure total secrecy. Cell phones and any other communication devices or recording devices are banned. In fact, they even operate cell phone jammers. So if you violate the security or secrecy of the conclave, you could potentially be excommunicated or imprisoned.
Yeah, and that does explain why a lot of people are like pretty shady about what happens in there.
No, we operate. You kind of get it though. You have to operate with total secrecy, because if you can't speak freely if you think that you're going to be punished for saying something. And this is like a big decision. The point of this is that, nobody outside of the conclave is gonna know who the new pope is before they make their official announcement. And like, they do take this extremely seriously, including taking into account modern technology that could violate this secrecy. So they install opaque film over all of the building windows to prevent journalists, drones, satellites, anybody from taking video or pictures, or using like AI software to do lip reading. So no one can see or hear what's going on inside. In the movie Conclave, they mention that they can potentially use lasers to get sound waves off of the windows.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if that's true. That seems pretty extreme. But the whole time, nobody's allowed in or out. You can't even get your DoorDash order.
I wonder if you could get a DoorDash order, if they could leave it outside and then one of the nuns could go get it for you.
Yeah.
No, you couldn't, because how would you order DoorDash? Because you can't have your phone.
Well, maybe you could ask one of the nuns to order DoorDash for you.
You could get one of the nuns to like very meaningfully leave her computer open for just a minute.
I do feel like the Vatican probably has pretty good food. If I'm gonna be like, you're in Rome, the food there is gonna slap. It's gonna be fine. You know.
Yeah, it did look like a good dinner in the movie.
Yeah, as long as you're not lactose intolerant or vegan, then you'll be okay.
I wonder if there are any vegan cardinals. That's not something I came across while looking up these guys.
It would make no meat on Friday a lot easier.
That's true.
Who gets to vote on this? There's 252 cardinals. This time around, at least, only 135 are eligible to vote for Pope, because in order to vote for Pope, you have to be younger than 80 years old.
Yes.
U.S. Congress, take note. A decision will be only reached when 2/3 of the cardinals agree. So if you're doing the math at home, 2/3 of 135 cardinals is 90 cardinals. So 90 cardinals out of 252 total cardinals have to agree on who gets to be the next pope.
Do you know, do the people who are too old to be voted or too old to participate in the voting, do they still go to the conclave? Like, I wonder if they do, because they're still eligible to be chosen for pope. And that would be awkward if they chose somebody who wasn't there. When
I was looking at, who could potentially be chosen as pope, there was a lot of talk of like, this person could be a potential, but they're on the young side and that person's like 57. And they're like, they usually don't choose a pope unless they're in like their 70s, or, you know, the idea is you have to have a lot of like age and wisdom in order to be the right person for being pope. Also, if you pick somebody younger, then it's a much bigger decision. Whereas if you pick somebody older, then, you know, maybe they'll only be pope for 10, 15 years. And if they really F things up, then not as big a deal. Whereas John Paul II was pope for 25, 26 years, and he made a lot of big changes.
Right. He made a lot of big changes, but he was also really popular. And I think the church does not want to commit to another person who can potentially be pope for 25, 26 years, because they kind of feel like nobody's going to match JP2.
Yeah. But you never know. I mean, I watched the movie Conclave, and the guy that got picked was definitely not in his, like, he didn't even have gray hair. He had some grays in his hair, but he, you know, I think he was probably in his 50s. I don't know. If I were one of the 252 cardinals and I were 83 years old, I would still want to go to the conclave, because even if I couldn't vote, I would still want to, I guess, have a say in the decision by talking to people and by offering advice and that sort of thing. Of the 135 cardinals who are eligible to vote for the Pope, 108 of them were appointed by Pope Francis. So it would seem that they could quite easily find a 2/3 majority of cardinals to support a Pope with similar views and similar ideas to Francis, and would continue his life's work. But that's not necessarily the case, because many of these cardinals weren't appointed like the way that we think of U.S. presidents appointing judges who will mirror their political ideology or favored constitutional doctrines. A lot of these cardinals are appointed because they represent regions of the world that don't have a ton of representation, or they represent factions of the Catholic Church that might not be in alignment with Pope Francis and his agenda, but they are very real factions that demand representation. Just because 108 of them were appointed by Pope Francis doesn't mean that it's easy to find 90 of them who will agree on a very progressive candidate. This doesn't mean that they will automatically be more progressive or more conservative. depending on who they were appointed by. So in the 2013 papal conclave that elected Pope Francis, for instance, more than half of the voting cardinals were not appointed by his predecessor, Pope Benedict, because Benedict was only Pope for 7 or 8 years. More than half of them were, in fact, appointed by Pope John Paul II, which makes sense because Pope Benedict was... Yeah, he was only Pope for 8 years, and John Paul II was Pope for 26 years. But because of the age limit, many of the cardinals appointed by John Paul II early in his papacy, they're not going to be allowed to vote anymore. And so while John Paul II was known for being supportive of political freedoms, he was very socially conservative. So just because the cardinals he appointed make up more than half of the eligible voters doesn't mean that the conclave that picks Francis is going to be 100% aligned with John Paul II, because they ended up picking with somebody who's much more socially progressive than the guy that picked them, if that makes sense. We don't exactly know what goes into the decision-making process for choosing a pope because the whole thing is very secret, but there are some things that we do know, which is that there are 4 rounds of voting every day until a candidate receives a 2/3 majority of the votes. So after every round of voting, the ballots are burned with a chemical, and then there's the smoke that comes from the chimney, and this smoke is either black or white, depending on whether or not they've chosen a pope. And so if the people outside waiting to see if they've chosen a new pope see black smoke, then they'll know that they haven't chosen a new pope and that no one's gotten the 2/3 majority. But if they see white smoke, then that means that a new pope has been chosen and that the people should get excited and be awaiting an announcement.
Habemus Papam.
Is that what it's called?
Mm-hmm. Habemus Papam. We have a pope. We have a papa. Yeah.
That's excellent. The longest that a conclave has ever gone since the 1900s is 5 days, when in 1922 it took them 5 days to elect Pius XI. Pope John Paul II's conclave went for 3 days. His predecessor, Pope John Paul I, was only pope he was not pope for very long. He was elected pope and then he died less than a year later. Pope Benedict's conclave went for 2. Pope Francis's conclave went for 2. With an agreement being reached the day after the conclave began. So I think like 2 to 5 days of voting is what we should expect. Not that it can't go longer, but that it probably won't.
That's wild to me because I was fully convinced of my memories of the 2005 conclave that it took like forever, like 11 days or something.
I read that it only went for 2.
I think that's probably because I was watching it with my dad and my dad was getting super hyped 4 times a day. Like, is it going to be black smoke or white smoke?
That's so fun.
Yeah, my dad is like, his fascination with like state funerals and parliamentary procedure and that sort of thing definitely extended to the Pope's funeral and the conclave process.
It's so fascinating. Like, if you're about the pomp and circumstance, this is all the pomp and all the circumstance.
Yeah, and my dad was nothing if not fully committed to pomp and circumstance. I will never forget my dad recorded John Paul II's funeral on VHS tape off the TV so he could rewatch it later.
What an event, though. Like, I mean, how many people attended John Paul II's funeral? A lot of people.
I don't know.
I believe it was, I read that it was the largest attended funeral. Like, it was bigger than Elvis. Let me look at that.
That would make sense.
John Paul II funeral. Let's see. Death and funeral of John Paul II.
Being my father's child, I also woke up at like 1 a.m. last year to watch Queen Elizabeth's funeral 2 years ago, whenever that was.
Approximately 4 million mourners converged on Rome for John Paul II's funeral. Wow.
Wow. That was a lot more than I expected.
That's a lot of people.
I think they said about 500,000 for Pope Francis.
That's still a lot of people coming to your funeral.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Wow. That's truly an incredible number of people to come to a funeral.
And I think they're saying that the current conclave will probably start around May 5th.
Oh, interesting. So we'll get this episode. Is that right?
Because the earliest it can be is 15 days after the Pope dies. And the latest it can be is 20 days after the Pope dies.
Like, they want to get the process going. They don't want another repeat of the 3 years without a Pope situation.
Yeah, they were very serious about we're not doing that again, I swear.
I wouldn't want to do that again. That would be crazy. It would be nuts. 3 years without a pope, what would we even do? How would we even know if, what would the church do? They would just be in kind of a holding pattern.
I saw a very, very funny meme that was like, are all Catholics just like on the honor system right now?
So we don't know what they're doing in there. My hypothesis is that all 235 eligible cardinals are having a Mario Kart tournament and the winner gets to be pope.
I mean, that's probably not a half bad idea, because I think that whoever wins the Mario Kart tournament is probably chosen and blessed by St. Carlo Acutis. So that seems like it would work.
The first millennial saint. Let's go.
Patron saint of the internet.
We need his intercessory prayer right now because things are going bad.
St. Carlo, help us out, please.
Yeah.
And help the next pope be TikTok friendly. R.I.P. Carlo Acutis, you would have loved TikTok.
If we see the Pope dancing to Espresso or, some Dochi song or something on TikTok, then I will know that the world has ended and the apocalypse has come and we all have been left behind.
The Antichrist attended the Pope's funeral, so who knows what timeline we're living in.
Anyway, let's take up the offering again, and you can talk to me about who are the potential contenders for Pope.
Okay.
I'm excited to hear about this.
It's not all bad news.
Not all bad news? Is it mostly good news?
There's some good news.
Okay, great. All right, we are back from our break. Sadie, tell me who is going to be the new pope. Do we know? What's going on? Who are the contenders? Who are the candidates?
I've looked into this, and I have thoughts. As we head into the conclaves, the top few contenders who are known to be popular and known to have like leadership potential or electability are referred to as papabile, which is just popeable, like I said earlier. And I'm going to use that word a lot because I really like it.
Are any of them John Lithgow?
No.
Okay.
So Vegas odds makers are going pretty wild with predictions on who is considered papabile and who will eventually be elected, as well as other factors of the conclave, like how many days it will take, how many rounds of voting will be necessary.
God, we are sickos. We are just like, this is nuts. Oh my God, we are sickos. Everything is gambling now. Everything. If you're out here gambling on how long the papal conclave is going to last, seek help. Seek help, you goddamn degenerate. Jesus.
See, I 100% thought about placing a bet on this, but then I remembered that I have banned myself from all forms of online gambling. I've never done online gambling. I just know that if I did, it would be really bad. Tried to get ahead of it by completely banning myself from it.
Every time you invent a new sin, then that's another, Jesus has got to get tortured a little bit again.
That's true.
Every time you invent a new sin, they got to put a new needle in Jesus's eye or something. I don't I swear to God, they're up in heaven being like, hey, Jesus, you're not going to like this, but people are gambling. People are on FanDuel. They've got player props for how long the papal conclave is going to go. I don't like doing this, but I've got to insert this needle into your under your fingernail or so. We got to pick something to You people are degenerates. I'm serious. Yeah. Stop. Stop. I'm begging you.
Aside from the Vegas odds, one thing I think is going to be very important to this papal election is age. And you touched on this earlier. The College of Cardinals doesn't want to elect a pope who is going to die only over 1 or 2 years, and then they have to do this all again, and there's a loss of continuity in the church. But right now, with such a big divide between progressive and conservative factions of the church, choosing a pope in his 60s feels like a very big swing, because they might not want to commit to somebody who could be pope for 2 decades or more. A lot of the top contenders I'm going to talk about are on the younger or older ends of the spectrum, which is interesting. There are quite a few people in those top few spots that are under 70 or that are nearly 80.
They're like, they're hedging here. This is dumb. This is dumb. They're just like, man, well, everything's so crazy right now. Let's just revisit this in another 8 years. Who's going to die soon? If you're dying soon, then we're picking you.
Right. But not in the next 2 years, but maybe in the next, I don't know, 6.
Yeah. If you've got cancer, you're out. But if you've got a family history of heart disease and you've got high blood pressure, then, let us see your medicals before we pick you. It's like the NFL draft combine. They want to see the medicals.
So I think it is interesting because the church it would make a lot of sense for the church to be looking for somebody more in the middle of the age range, 75. But a lot of the people who happen to be really popular right now are a little older or a little younger than the conclave might want. So I think that's going to be a major decision-making factor that shakes this one up a little bit.
I'm saying that they should just bite the bullet and make a choice. Decide what you want to be. Do you want to be the weird church for people who don't want to let you or do you want to be the church that helps poor people?
Well, let's talk about who some of these contenders are, because I think you'll be really interested.
Hit me.
There are a few options that are considered conservative to moderate options that keep popping up as I'm reading these articles. The first one is Cardinal Peter Erdo, who is the current Archbishop of Budapest, Hungary. Erdo is theologically traditionally very conservative. He does not share Francis's progressive opinions on women and LGBTQ people, although he stands very strong on welcoming and protecting migrants. Erdo I forgot to look up his age. 72.
Okay, so if you pick him, he could be Pope for 20 years. He could be Pope for 3 years. You never know. I mean, Pope Francis was 88, right?
Another conservative option, and this is one I think is really interesting, is Cardinal Peter Turkson, who is from Ghana. Some articles will say, oh, Cardinal Turkson could be the first Black Pope. That's a little oversimplified. There have been 3 known popes with African roots, although it's not really known what their ethnicity or their appearance would have been or how they would identify their race now. Literally 1,500 years later since the most recent one, there have been popes from Northern Africa. It's just not really known A, what they would have looked like, and B, how they would have identified themselves. So Turkson would not be the first African pope. He might be the first Black pope, and he would certainly be the first Black or African pope in 1,500 years if he were elected. Yeah. So that's one major first in a long time opportunity. It's seen as pretty typical or usual for African Catholic leadership to be very conservative, and Turkson is no exception. He's been very traditional and conservative on Catholic issues such as LGBTQ inclusion, marriage, divorce, abortion. One spark of good news, and I know this is very, very small good news, but Turkson has strongly opposed same-sex relationships being criminalized in Ghana. So, yes, I know that should not be
right.
Should not be good news. This does not make him some kind of hero. His stance is basically, yeah, if you're an LGBTQ person, you are sinning, but the government shouldn't be able to kill you or put you in jail for it.
Okay. I mean, not my favorite, but...
Yeah, but better than the opposite, right?
Is he trying to bring back Latin Mass?
Turkson, no.
Okay, well there
is another guy on here who is, I think, if I can find it.
That would be crazy.
Peter Turkson is the more conservative, or considered the more conservative of the 2 African cardinals that are coming up at the top of this list. The other one is Cardinal Robert Sarah. Cardinal Sarah had some pretty serious conflict with Pope Francis over just how essential the celibacy of priests is. And you mentioned this earlier as well. Francis was kind of wobbling on, I don't know if priestly celibacy is really necessary. And Particularly, what Francis was considering was whether men who are already married could become priests in the Amazon in order to address a shortage of priests. Cardinal Sarah, there's a rumor that he leveraged Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI's name to co-publish his, Cardinal Sarah's, opposition to Francis and got Pope Benedict to sign on to it to increase his credibility when he was speaking out about what the current Pope was saying. And this is widely considered to have hurt his chances because this came off as being underhanded. Yeah, and Benedict was not about it. He was not trying to I was not a major fan of Benedict or his policies or his thoughts. But I do think he really tried to avoid interfering in Pope Francis's reign. I really think that Benedict tried to stay out of it. And the public perception is that Cardinal Sarah almost tricked Benedict into co-publishing this work that would go against what Francis was currently saying. And I do not know if that happened. I don't have enough information to know. If that happened, yeah, that's very underhanded.
Pope Benedict isn't the most fondly remembered of the popes.
No, there are definitely people who were big fans and definitely people who weren't. I think that John Paul II was very popular, and it's hard to follow a popular leader. We see this with monarchs, with presidents, whatever. Often the person right after a very popular leader is very unpopular. Personally, I really disliked a lot of Benedict's ideas and policies. Anyway, Cardinal Sarah is also 79. So he is among the oldest of the papabile. So that would make him an interesting choice. He would also be the first Black and the first African pope in at least 1,500 years if he were elected. Cardinal Pietro Parolin is another name that comes up a lot. Parolin was the Vatican Secretary of State under Pope Francis. And I think the really big deal here is that he will be incredibly recognizable to the voting electorate. One article that I read is that the cardinal electors will be voting in a room full of strangers. These are men who were cardinals during COVID. This is the first post-COVID conclave. These cardinals, you said 108 of them were appointed by Francis, which means they became cardinals during Francis's era of stripped down church tradition. But cardinals are required to visit Rome every 5 years. And part of that requirement to visit Rome every 5 years is to meet with the Pope's Secretary of State. So, Pietro Parolin is one of the few people, if not the only person, who has actually met each of the cardinal electors before this conclave.
What do we know about him as far as his views are?
Parolin is a don't rock the boat anymore choice. If the church chose him, the church would be saying, okay, we don't want to fully run away from Francis's progressivism, but also that is enough progressivism for now. Let's level it out here and chill for a few years.
So he's conservative in the classical definition of conservatism, in that
status quo.
Don't take down the fence unless you know why it's there kind of guy. Okay.
Yeah, I agree. And Parolin was also personal friends, very close with Pope Francis. So while it seems like he may be a little bit more conservative personally, he also has a lot of respect for the former Pope, and that might make him more likely to follow his footsteps a little bit more. There is an old saying, if you enter the conclave as Pope, you leave as a cardinal. Meaning that the person who goes in, the most likely to be chosen is almost never who ends up getting it, and the more confident you are going in that they're going to pick you, the less likely it is to actually happen. And I would say out of anyone, Parolin is maybe closest to entering the conclave as Pope. So that'll be interesting. I've got my eye on him for sure.
And that stands to reason, because if you're angling for your candidate to be Pope and you don't like the guy who they're, or and you don't like Parolin for whatever reason, or you don't like Sarah for whatever reason, then those are the people that you have your opposition strategy planned for. You know that
Right.
That's who you're going to take down. It's it's somebody out of the other like 105 people, or the other 200 and some people that you just don't know.
Which is an interesting, it's an interesting electoral system that, from the Catholic viewpoint, it's to allow the Holy Spirit to work and to allow this to be a superhuman decision. And whether you believe in that or not, I do think it is a really interesting methodology to keep if somebody goes in as the front runner, either everybody agrees on them or they are unable to grab power. So, you can believe the Holy Spirit but or not, that's totally fine. But I do think it's an interesting system that maybe has some, it maybe favors people who are not favored going in.
And 2/3 majority is a pretty strong majority that you have to have. Like, if there are major and serious objections to a person, then, and maybe they could get 50% of the vote or 51% of the vote, then they're not going to be able to make it to that 2/3 threshold. So people are going to need to compromise. Like, if you have a ceiling of 51% of the vote, then maybe you could get majority, but if it gives the minority power a strong veto over who could potentially be chosen. I think that's interesting.
Yeah. And it highly encourages a compromise choice.
Yeah.
Which I think a lot of very progressive Catholics would not see that as a great thing, would want a more extreme, a more progressive choice. I think if it was up to me to choose the Pope, that's probably what I would do. But it is in the interest of the Catholic Church as an institution to have a compromise choice.
I think that if you have a system where you have to make compromises, then then it also behooves that system that there is a certain amount of secrecy around it, so that you can do what you think is right without fear of being punished for it.
Yeah. The system, I'm not coming out as a major proponent or major hater of the conclave system. But I think it makes sense why it works for the Catholic Church at this point in time.
Right. I agree with you, especially because I think with the number of voters being people who were appointed by Pope Francis, while it doesn't, mandate that they're all people who are going to agree with him ideologically, because I think that if he started just only appointing people that agreed with him ideologically to the College of Cardinals, then that would cause a lot of serious issues within the church. I think that does, to some degree, put up some guardrails. So you're probably not going to end up with somebody who's like, no, we're bringing back the full Latin Mass. We're getting rid of Vatican II. The Jews killed Jesus again.
Yeah.
That kind of.
And in modern times, the idea is that the person who would get elected Pope is not the kind of person who would politic like that. That the person who was elected Pope would trust the other men in leadership and the power of the Holy Spirit to guide and direct the Catholic Church before and after their election to Pope. I think the reality is that if the Pope is going to politic like that, he has at least got to keep it all the way on the down low.
Right. It's like when you watch, do you watch The Circle on Netflix?
Yes. Love The Circle.
You know how when people start to realize that a player is too good at the game, they're just like, no, this is the player I'm getting rid of.
Yeah.
That's the issue that you're going to face. If you're too good at the politicking, then it's like Survivor. If you're too good at it, then people are going to be like, that guy's a threat. I got to get rid of him.
Yep. So I want to talk about a couple of the other options that I find interesting. And I want to make the disclaimer. I didn't choose to talk about everybody who's considered popeable at this time. I pointed out the people who are personally interesting to me. I truly would not be surprised if a candidate arose that was on absolutely no one's list.
Like the Obama of popes.
Yeah, although I am going to make the analogy that Francis was the Obama of popes. In a lot of ways.
So who are the other candidates that we have to look at?
So one of the most progressive candidates is Cardinal Luis Tagle from the Philippines.
Oh, interesting.
Tagle is sometimes referred to as the Asian Pope Francis. He shares a lot of views with the former pope, and he's only 67, so he is one of the younger, serious candidates in the mix. That's part of why, personally, I think he may be elected pope the next time. Like, I could see it coming back around for Tagle, because actually that's what happened to Francis. Francis was a contender, not a top contender, but Francis was a contender in the 2005 papal election. He was passed up for Benedict, and then it came back around for him the second time. I think that it's more likely for that to happen to Tagle this time than for him to be elected this time. But if elected, he would be the first Asian pope. I'm not going to be obtuse and pretend that the Catholic Church isn't a racist place, just like almost all seats of power. And I'm not going to deny the history of colonialism inflicted by the Church. I think that not being white is a major downfall to anyone hoping or not hoping to be elected pope. So that goes for Tagle, Sarah Turkson, and all the other non-white men who are in considerations.
I'm wondering if, say they pick a non-white pope, or say they pick Tagle as pope, then are we going to get the right-wing grifter internet saying that we got a DEI pope, and then everybody who's like right-wing grifter Catholic on the internet, like, the trad Cath influencers are like, nah, we're all converting to Eastern Orthodox, or... I mean, I'm kind of joking, but I'm also kind of serious that they might be like, well, actually, the Orthodox Church is basically the same as the Catholic Church, but, it's got that real Christianity, none of this woke DEI Pope.
I want to do an episode about like trad Catholicism and Latin Mass people soon, because I think it's a little bit more nuanced than I can get into unless I do a whole episode. I personally don't feel that the potential for the Catholic Church to actually split is that severe right now. I'm thinking in terms of like the doomsday clock, right? The doomsday clock that's 1 minute till midnight, it's 10 minutes till midnight. I'm basing this on, however, my data isn't great, because number one, the Catholic Church hasn't had a major actual split in about 500 years. What was it, 1517, 506 years? Nope. It is not 2003. Jesus. $508 years.
Math.
It's not 2003. Anyway, or 2023. But it's been a while. So it's hard to predict an actual major split within the Catholic Church. I've seen a lot of micro splits within independent fundamental Baptist congregations and groups of congregations, and I also paid a lot of attention to the ongoing Methodist Church split, which I think is probably the biggest major denominational split in a while.
And that was over LGBT issues.
Yes, correct. Personally, I don't think this is quite a big enough deal. I don't think there's a pope that could get elected, either a very conservative or a very progressive pope, that would actually split the Catholic Church at this time. I recognize that my data isn't complete to make that prediction, but I don't think that's going to get to that point.
I don't think that there would be a split either. I think that is like a crazy thing to suggest. What I think could happen would be if they pick a really progressive pope, then the people who make their, living off of being reactionary Catholic grifters, which are there's reactionary grifters of pretty much every religious bent. I think that a lot of those people would either take this as an opportunity to go Orthodox and be like, oh, I'm an Orthodox grifter now. We're so much better than the Catholics because the Catholic Church went woke.
I see what you're talking about.
Yeah, it would be more of like that we would see localized to the internet in like America. Not like, I think that conservative countries where everyone is Catholic would suddenly like decide that they didn't want to be Catholic anymore because the Catholic Church got too progressive. The other thing I think could happen is if the Catholic Church went the other direction and went much further into the traditional and like rolled back a lot of the stuff that Pope Francis did, I think that they would lose a lot of more progressive people, especially in America, that those people would decide, they would just be more deconstructing. We would see a lot of that. There's not going to be like a new Catholic Church of like, or they're not going to go Lutheran or they're not going to go Protestant or something. They're just going to say, you know what, this isn't for me.
So that actually ties in really well to the next thing I was going to say about Tagle. So during his ministry in the Philippines, he has showed a ton of growth in youth involvement in the church and, crucially, youth choosing Catholic vocations. So people becoming priests, monks, or nuns. And that could be incredibly attractive to the electors. Like, youth involvement has been a major issue in the Catholic Church for quite a while. And youth dropping out of church, youth deconstructing has been a major issue for quite a while. And I think that Tagle has a lot going against him because the church is racist, just like other seats of power are. But if something gets him elected, that's what I think it's going to be.
How much do you know about the youth culture in the Philippines?
Not much other than what I've read in relation to Tagle.
Okay. Because, yeah, I'm wondering, because if it was somebody in America who was successful at doing that, then I could see it being, this is somebody who is able to get young people to understand that the church fits with their sense of morality in this way with relation to these issues like, the environment, like, the kind of outreach that and goodwill that was generated by somebody like Pope Francis. I just don't know enough about the youth culture in the Philippines to say that those things also apply.
Well, let's talk about a couple of Americans.
Oh, interesting.
Okay.
So we could have an American Pope.
This would be another first. There has never been a pope from the United States of America or from North America, because Francis was the first pope from the Americas total, and he was from Argentina. Cardinal Joseph Tobin is currently the Archbishop of Newark, New Jersey. He has been all in on the Pope Francis train. He has been outspoken about the inclusion of women and LGBTQ people in the church. He has publicly spoken out against Donald Trump. He's done some physical activism, visiting with people, inviting people into the church, physically come to this church, in a similar way to things that we saw Pope Francis do. We saw Pope Francis washing the feet of imprisoned youth, kissing the feet of African bishops who arrived at the Vatican. Those kind of physical actions of penance and welcome are something that Cardinal Tobin is really all about. I think he's probably way too liberal to get elected, but I think he's pretty cool.
We could have a Pope from Jersey. That's crazy.
Pope from Jersey, right? No. So Tobin is from, I think, Minnesota.
So he's a Vikes fan?
I think so. And then Cardinal Robert Prevost is the one who was born in Chicago, but currently serves in Rome. So he is American, but he has been working in Rome for a few years. And Prevost is definitely more mainstream or middle of the road compared to Tobin or Tagle. I don't know much else against Cardinal Prevost. I know that he's been very quiet. He's worked in Rome. He's kind of been an under the radar guy. Also, Cardinal Mark Ouellet? How would you say that? Ouellet.
Yeah, I think it's
Ouellet?
Ouellet, because in French, the T is silent unless there's like a vowel after it.
It is Ouellet? Okay.
Yeah, the T is silent unless there's a vowel after it.
Oh, okay. Well, that guy is also a possibility. And he is, I would describe him as socially conservative, but policy-wise more progressive. Finally, I did save the best for last. I want to talk about the potential pope with the coolest name ever, who of course is Cardinal Pier Battista Pizzaballa.
That's a great name.
That is his real name, Pier Battista Pizzaballa. Jokes about his name aside, there are actually some reasons to like Cardinal Pizzaballa. He is Italian, which could be an attractive factor for electors because it has been a while since there has been an Italian pope. Cardinal Pizzaballa has been the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem since the year 2020. And I would describe him as being very even-handed during war in the region. He has not been extreme. He has been focused on serving the people in his jurisdiction. And the big moves that he's made have been pretty non-political. For example, he offered himself as ransom for some hostages that were taken in 2023.
Wow.
And that's big heroism. That's a big move.
That's crazy.
But that's like fairly apolitical. He didn't.
Right. That's not on behalf of like a government. That's not on behalf of like a.
Yeah, serving the people.
Yeah.
He's also been visible at protests against certain actions taken by the state of Israel. And I mention this to show that he'd be considered liberal in that aspect by some Americans. But what I actually want to point out here is that he has not played both sides. He has not been political. He has not taken sides. What he's done is he has handled a really difficult conflict with decisiveness and with a mind towards peace, which I think is admirable.
Yeah. It's always like the little guy that gets crushed.
Right. And he hasn't used it for his own. I don't see him as using it for his own fame or his own gain. I think a lot of people take world tragedies and then want to make themselves famous off of it. And that's not the vibe I get from this guy. So Pizzaballa, a little bit of a cringe. He did criticize the 2024 Paris Olympics opening ceremony as mocking Christianity. Also a bit
He's
cringe.
not the only one.
Yeah. Also a bit cringe. He has stated that he does not support allowing divorced people or LGBTQ people to have full rights within the church. So his personal views seem to be pretty conservative, but he has said that he hopes the next pope will continue in continuity with Pope Francis, especially regarding women's role in the church. So what I'm hearing is maybe I didn't agree with Francis on everything, but I'm not going to shake things up that much. So the reaction to Francis's death was definitely a bit of an oh shit moment for people who are invested for many different reasons in the Christian church becoming more progressive and more of a safe and welcoming place for people of sexual and gender minorities, for women, for people of color, etc. But I do feel better after researching these candidates. The information I have about them is very, very basic, but I feel like the Donald Trump of popes is not in this mix. Pope Francis was very much the Obama of popes. I don't think there's a Trump in the mix. I think a lot of these popes have the potential to be the Joe Biden of popes.
That's sort of what I'm getting here.
Yeah.
Is kind of like an interim. I don't want to say an interim pope, but my thought is that, I mean, they could choose somebody who is a not really much of a reformer, but just kind of in the middle, just kind of like, I'm not going to rock the boat any more than Francis has, but I'm not going to roll back any of the stuff that he does. And that guy's pope for a while, then that's kind of whatever. And then you sort of run out the clock and see what culture is like in 10, 15 years from now.
Yeah.
If you pick something, because I was looking at these popes or these candidates who are on the more conservative side, and it seems like a lot of them are older. And so if you end up with one of them who is pope for like 4 years or 5 years or something, then they may end up doing damage to the church's reputation if they go too conservative with it, if they try to roll back too much and there's too much objection to that. And then that may lead to the next pope being somebody who is more in the ilk of Francis. Or they could pick somebody who is more in the ilk of Francis and they could be pope for a while. Like, you just never know what's going to happen.
Yeah. It's, I could see it going a lot of different ways. I think I feel better after having researched the candidates, because I think what this has led me to think about is why the Catholic Church prioritizes continuity and why a change is so slow within the Catholic Church. That doesn't mean it has to be something that I'm a fan of or fully agree with or like would choose myself if I were somehow in charge. But I feel like it's something I can comprehend a little bit better, and that's nice. I think this gives a neat perspective to see how and why the church changes so slowly. And it's a good reminder that groups like Dignity, which is a LGBTQ affirming faction within the Catholic Church, are going to continue regardless of who gets elected pope. There are many positive changes that could still happen, and I hope they do. I look forward to seeing the white smoke sometime in a couple weeks and hearing Habemus Papam.
And I hope they pick somebody cool. I hope they pick somebody that
they'll pick whoever wins the Mario Kart tournament.
Yeah.
But also, I feel like if your last name was Pizzaballa, you'd probably like genetically be good at Mario Kart.
My final question is, what is the Pope name that you would like to see brought back?
Oh, there's people are betting on that too.
Of course they are, because people are degenerates. Stop gambling on everything, guys.
I think it would be.
Everything is gambling now. Everything is gambling. Crypto is gambling. You can't watch sports without it be gambling. That, like, it's just everything is gambling, and it's exhausting. You know, I mean, how long are we from when CNN is starting running? You know, they have ESPN Bet. Why don't they have CNN Bet, where it's based on like how long will the how long will it go for Congress to agree on a budget? The over under is like, that's where we are in our society. Like, how long until that is a reality?
Who knows?
How long until CNN is like, our quarterly numbers are bad, we need to partner with FanDuel?
All I have to say about that is invest in Brawndo because it has electrolytes.
Yeah.
What's
Brawndo?
Idiocracy.
Oh, yeah. I remember that.
The movie that invented Crocs, believe it or not. We don't have time for that today.
I'm thinking about like what Pope names I would like to.
Names. So
in the movie Conclave, he brought back Innocent.
Yeah, Innocente, which I was going to say that could be a cool choice. Leo is apparently a betting favorite right now.
Yeah, and so I'm looking here. It says on this website that is epicpew.com, has a list of Pope names you'll probably never hear again. And one of them is Anacletus, and in parentheses, Cletus. So we could have Pope Cletus the third, or the second.
Mm-hmm.
Pope Cletus was Pope from 76 to 88. I
really could see a really old, I think it's been a while since there's been a Pope Clement. But Clement is associated with merciful, is kind of a rough translation.
There's Pope Liberius, who is the 36th Pope from 352 to 366. I'm just looking. There's Pope Severinus, who was the Pope in 640.
Severinus, I'm pretty sure Severinus was like I don't want to say a bad guy, but like controversial.
It says he was only Pope. It says popes who served for a year or less, and it says Pope Severinus, the 71st Pope, who was only Pope during the year 640.
There have been a lot of Clements. There have been at least 7, but I'm not seeing one more recently than like the 16th century.
There is Pope Simplicius, who was Pope from 468 to 483. I don't know. There's a lot of good ones in here. I mean, what are the chances that we get like a new Pope name?
That would surprise me. There are a lot to choose from.
Here's my thought.
The last Clement was a Medici, so maybe not. Maybe it's a nice name, but maybe a little too tainted.
They had Pope John Paul, and then they had Pope John Paul II, right?
Yes.
And I think that there have been too many Pope John Pauls, and I think we need the Pope George Ringo.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say Pope John Paul John. Although Cardinal Turkson famously played guitar in a funk band.
Oh, that's sick.
So he might be your Pope George Ringo. He's got a musical background.
Well, thank you guys for tuning into this episode. Next week, we're going to have our full review of the book by Paul Olagus called Pab's Legend of Bloodfang. If you want to hear my initial thoughts on that, you can head over to our YouTube channel, which the video is up there. I have now learned to edit YouTube videos, which is a lot of fun. And I think if this video gets a good response, then I'm going to start doing them more, because I think people really want it. People would like to see it. So head over there and check that out. We've also got a guest coming on, I believe, the week after that. We have to get the details of that hashed out. It's been awesome to be here and to talk about this really interesting topic with you guys. Can't wait to hear your thoughts on it. You can follow the pod on social media at Leaving Eden Podcast on Instagram and Bluesky. You can join our Discord server. Link is down below. You can join our Facebook group at Eden Exodus, facebook.com/group/Eden Exodus, and we've got reddit.com/r/Eden Exodus. You can follow me on socials at Gavi Hakohen on Bluesky and Gavriel Hakohen on Instagram. And you can follow Sadie at Sadie Carpenter Music on Instagram, Hell Yeah Sadie on Bluesky, and Sadie Carpenter 1 on TikTok. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. You guys have a great day. Bye-bye.
But old rolling river of time, you've healed me in too many days. No regrets, no confusion. There'll be no pollution. I'm so thankful I've decided to change my ways. I'm so thankful I decided